Jake Mitchell couldn't remember the last time he'd seen a sunrise on Earth. Was it 3 years ago? Maybe 4? Time blurred together when you were a slave soldier, and counting days felt pointless when every morning might be your last. The Kratesh had taken everything from humanity, their homes, their freedom, their dignity. Now humans were just bodies with rifles, thrown at whatever enemy the reptilian empire decided needed killing that week. The 47th unit wasn't special. They weren't elite troops or honored guards. They were what the Kratesh called expendables, which was a fancy way of saying cannon fodder. Jake had watched good people die in battles that meant nothing to him, fighting wars for creatures that saw humans as slightly smarter livestock. His hands had calluses from weapons he never wanted to hold, and his dreams were filled with faces of friends who didn't make it past last month. But everything changed when the transport ship landed on Draker Prime. The moment Jake stepped off that ship, he knew this place was different. The air felt heavier somehow, thick with something that made his skin crawl. The other prisoners in the 47th unit felt it too. His friend Tommy kept looking around nervously, like he expected something to jump out at them. Beth, who usually cracked jokes to keep morale up, stayed quiet. Even the tough ones like Danny and Lisa looked uncomfortable. The Kratesh guards were different here too. Back on the war fronts, they treated human slaves with casual cruelty, like you'd swat an annoying insect. Here on Draker Prime, the guards seemed almost nervous. They moved faster, kept their weapons ready, and their eyes kept darting toward the massive structure in the center of the base. An enormous pit surrounded by walls that looked like they'd been built to contain something truly terrible. Jake learned the truth that first evening when the alarm sirens started wailing. Every prisoner was ordered out of their cells and marched to observation platforms overlooking the pit. Jake's stomach dropped when he saw what waited below. The pit was massive, easily the size of 3 football fields, with walls so deep you couldn't see the bottom. Massive chains thicker than tree trunks hung from the walls, disappearing into the darkness. Then he heard it. A sound that made his bones vibrate, a low rumble that wasn't mechanical. It was alive. It was breathing. What the hell is that? Tommy whispered beside him. An older prisoner, a guy named Greg who'd been on Draker Prime for months, answered with a shaky voice. That's Varthax. The dragon. The Kratesh keep it here because it's too dangerous to keep anywhere else. Jake had heard rumors about alien creatures and ancient species, but he'd always figured they were just stories prisoners told to pass time. Now staring into that pit he realized how wrong he'd been. The gates opened with a grinding screech of metal. The ground literally shook as something emerged from the darkness. Varthax was beyond anything Jake's mind could process. The dragon's scales looked like polished black stone, each one the size of a shield. Its wings unfolded slowly, stretching so wide they cast shadows over half the base. But it was the eyes that froze Jake's blood, burning orange like molten metal, ancient and aware in a way that made him feel tiny and insignificant. The Kratesh commander shouted something in their harsh language, and soldiers below opened fire on distant targets. Rebels or enemies, Jake couldn't tell and didn't care. What he cared about was watching Varthax move. The dragon didn't charge blindly. It flew with terrible grace, its movements calculated and precise. When it reached the enemy fortress on the horizon, there was no battle. There was just fire and destruction. The fortress crumbled like sand. The screams carried across the distance, cutting off one by one until there was only silence. Varthax returned to its pit and the gates closed. The dragon disappeared back into darkness like a nightmare returning to sleep. Jake stood there, his hands trembling, his mind trying to process what he'd just witnessed. This creature was a weapon. Just like him. Just like all of them. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. None of them could. The cell block was silent except for quiet breathing and the occasional sound of someone crying. Jake lay on his bunk, staring at the ceiling when he heard movement from the bunk below. It was Amy, one of the few people from his original unit who'd survived this long. Jake, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You awake? Yeah. I heard the guards talking. They said Varthax isn't just for enemies. She paused and Jake could hear the fear in her voice. They feed it prisoners sometimes. Anyone who disobeys orders or tries to escape. They throw them in the pit. Jake closed his eyes, but all he could see were those burning orange eyes staring back at him from the darkness. He wondered how many humans had already been fed to that creature. He wondered how long before his own number came up. The only question that mattered now was simple. How much longer would his luck hold out? The mission was supposed to be simple. Get in, secure the supply depot, get out. Jake had done a dozen operations just like it, and they all followed the same pattern. The Kratesh commander stayed back while humans did the actual fighting and dying. This time should have been no different. But everything went wrong the moment they breached the depot doors. The enemy was waiting. Not scattered patrols or surprised guards, but a full ambush with heavy weapons and prepared positions. The explosions came first, then the gunfire. Jake hit the ground hard, his ears ringing, tasting blood and dirt. Around him, people were screaming. He saw Tommy take a hit to the leg and go down. Beth was returning fire from behind a destroyed container, her face covered in soot and blood. "Fall back," someone yelled, but falling back wasn't an option. The Kratesh had ordered them to take the depot, and retreat meant execution. So they fought. They fought like cornered animals because that's exactly what they were. When the shooting finally stopped, Jake looked around at what was left of his unit. Half of them were gone. Just gone. Some were dead, some were too wounded to move, and the medics were doing what they could with almost no supplies. The survivors sat in silence, too exhausted and traumatized to speak. Then War Chief Drex arrived. Drex was the kind of Kratesh that gave Jake nightmares. Most of the reptilian commanders were cruel, but in a cold, distant way. Drex was different. He enjoyed the cruelty. You could see it in the way he moved, in the way his scarred face twisted when he looked at human prisoners. The scars came from some battle years ago, and rumor was he blamed humans for them, even though humans hadn't even met the Kratesh back then. Drex walked through the depot, his heavy footsteps echoing, examining the dead and wounded with disgust. His translator collar crackled as he spoke. "Pathetic. Weak. Half your unit destroyed by inferior enemies." Jake wanted to scream that they'd been ambushed, that they'd fought against impossible odds, that they'd won despite everything. But speaking out of turn meant punishment, and punishment from Drex meant death. "Which one of you failed first?" Drex demanded, his yellow eyes scanning the survivors. Which coward broke the line? Nobody spoke. You didn't volunteer information to Kratesh commanders, especially not Drex. But one of the guards pointed at Ryan Cooper. "That one, War Chief. I saw him freeze when the attack began." Jake's blood went cold. Ryan was just a kid, barely 20 years old. He'd been drafted from Earth only 6 months ago, still fresh enough to have hope in his eyes. And yes, Ryan had frozen during those first crucial seconds of the ambush, but not because he was scared. Jake had seen what really happened. When the explosions hit, Ryan was closest to 3 wounded soldiers. Instead of taking cover, the kid had grabbed 2 of them and started dragging them to safety. He'd frozen because he was trying to figure out how to save the third person, even while bullets were flying past his head. Ryan had saved lives while the Kratesh officers were running for cover. But Drex didn't care about truth. He cared about having someone to blame. "You," Drex pointed at Ryan with one clawed hand. "You are the weakness that killed your unit." "No, sir, I was helping the wounded," Ryan started, but Drex backhanded him across the face. The kid went down hard, blood pouring from his nose. "Silence. I do not accept excuses from prey animals." Drex turned to address all the survivors. "Your unit has failed the Empire. Your weakness has cost resources. Therefore, you will all pay the price for this one's cowardice." Amy grabbed Jake's arm, her fingers digging in hard. Everyone knew what was coming next. "Your entire unit will feed Varthax," Drex announced, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You die together for your failure. Perhaps your screams will teach the other slaves what happens to the weak." The guards moved in fast, slapping heavy chains on wrists and ankles. Jake felt the cold metal bite into his skin, heard the clicks of locks sealing his fate. Around him, his friends were being chained too. Beth was crying silently. Tommy was cursing under his breath. Ryan just looked stunned, like his mind couldn't process what was happening. They were marched through the base in those chains, past other prisoners who turned away, unable to watch. Nobody helped. Nobody could help. The Kratesh made sure everyone saw what happened to failures. The pit came into view and Jake's stomach twisted. Those massive walls, those enormous chains hanging into the darkness. Somewhere down there, Varthax was waiting. But as they got closer, Jake started noticing something odd. The dragon was already at the surface, like it had been waiting for them. Those burning orange eyes were visible in the shadows, watching their approach. Jake expected to see hunger there, the mindless appetite of a beast about to be fed. Instead, what he saw made him stop breathing for a moment. The dragon's eyes weren't wild or hungry. They were focused, tracking each prisoner with careful attention. More than that, they were intelligent, not animal intelligence but something ancient and aware. Varthax was studying them, reading them. And when those eyes shifted to look at the Kratesh guards, at War Chief Drex himself, Jake saw something that changed everything. He saw hatred. Pure, calculated, ancient hatred. The dragon wasn't just a mindless beast kept in chains. It was a prisoner just like them. And it despised its captors just as much as Jake did. Jake stood at the edge of the pit, his chains rattling as his hands shook. Below him, darkness stretched down forever, and somewhere in that darkness Varthax waited. Behind him, his friends were lined up, all of them about to be thrown to their deaths because of one lie told by a coward who couldn't admit the truth. Warchief Drex was enjoying this. Jake could see it in the way the alien commander moved, taking his time, savoring the fear rolling off the human prisoners. Drex walked down the line slowly, deciding who would go first. His clawed hand reached out toward Amy, who was trying so hard to stay brave but couldn't stop the tears running down her face. That's when Jake made his choice. "Wait," he shouted, his voice cracking but loud enough to echo off the pit walls. "I'll go first." Every head turned toward him. The other prisoners stared with wide eyes. The Kratesh guards looked confused. And Drex started laughing. It was a horrible sound, like metal scraping on stone, made worse by the translator collar that turned it into something humans could understand. "The animal wishes to volunteer?" Drex said, moving away from Amy to approach Jake instead. "How very entertaining. Tell me, slave, are you so eager to die? Or do you simply want to spare your female companion a few more minutes of life?" Jake's heart was hammering in his chest, but he forced himself to stand straighter. "I'm not doing this for a few more minutes. I'm doing this because I have something to say." "To whom?" "To me." Drex leaned in close, his breath hot and smelling like rotten meat. "I have no interest in the final words of prey." "Not to you," Jake said and turned to face the pit. "To Varthax." The laughter died instantly. Even the guards went quiet. "You didn't speak to the dragon. You didn't acknowledge it as anything more than a weapon, a tool, a beast." But Jake had seen those eyes, had seen the intelligence and the hatred burning there, and he knew the truth that the Kratesh either didn't see or refused to acknowledge. Jake raised his voice, calling down into the darkness. "I know you understand me. I know you're not just some mindless beast they keep in chains." Movement in the shadows below. The dragon was listening. "We're the same, you and us," Jake continued, his words coming faster now, driven by desperation and a crazy hope that maybe, just maybe, this would work. "We're slaves. We're weapons they use against people we have no reason to hate. They keep us in chains and they force us to kill for them, and they don't care if we live or die because to them we're just tools that can be replaced." Drex grabbed Jake's shoulder, claws digging in. "Silence, you fool. Look at him," Jake shouted, jerking away even though it made the chains bite deeper into his wrists. "Really look at him. Those eyes aren't the eyes of a dumb animal. He understands every word, and he hates you just as much as we do." The laughter from the other guards had stopped completely now. Some of them were actually backing away from the pit's edge. Because down below, Varthax had moved into the light, and those burning orange eyes were fixed on Jake with an intensity that made the air feel electric. Jake's voice dropped, but in the sudden silence it carried clearly. "Take me. Devour me if that's what you need. But let me speak first. Let me tell you what I see when I look at you." He paused, meeting those ancient eyes. "I see someone who's been caged for too long. Someone who remembers what freedom felt like. Someone who's tired of being their monster." For a moment nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then Varthax moved. The dragon's massive head rose higher, and his wings, those enormous wings that could blot out the sun, spread wide. But it wasn't a threatening gesture. It was something else. Recognition maybe. Or agreement. Jake heard Amy gasp behind him. Heard Tommy whisper, "Holy hell." Even the Kratesh guards were backing up now, their weapons raised but their hands shaking. Drex's face twisted with rage. Enough of this nonsense. He grabbed Jake with both hands and shoved him hard. "Feed well, beast." Jake tumbled forward, his stomach dropping as he fell into the pit. The walls blurred past him. He hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from his lungs and sending pain shooting through his shoulder and leg. For a second he just lay there, stunned, trying to remember how to breathe. Above him he could hear his squad screaming his name. Amy was crying out, "Jake! Jake!" Beth and Tommy were yelling too, their voices mixing together into a sound of pure horror and grief. But Jake forced himself to move. He pushed himself up onto his knees, then to his feet even though everything hurt. The chains on his wrists were still locked, making his movements clumsy. Blood ran down from where his shoulder had hit stone. His leg might have been broken, he couldn't tell yet. None of that mattered. What mattered was standing up. What mattered was facing the dragon and not running, not cowering, not begging. If these were his last moments, he'd face them standing. Varthax moved closer, each footstep making the ground tremble. The dragon was even more massive up close, scales like black mirrors reflecting Jake's tiny form. Those wings folded back, making scraping sounds against the pit walls. Heat radiated off the creature's body, and Jake could smell sulfur and ash. The dragon's head lowered slowly, carefully until they were eye to eye. Jake could see his own reflection in those burning orange eyes. He could feel the dragon's breath, hot enough to make sweat instantly pour down his face. Jake didn't run. He stood his ground, looked into those ancient eyes and waited. Jake stood frozen, staring into those massive orange eyes, when suddenly something happened that made his brain short-circuit. A voice echoed inside his head, not through his ears, but directly into his mind through the neural implant the Kratesh had forced into every human slave's skull. The voice was deep, ancient, like the rumble of an earthquake given words. You speak truth, human. I am no one's weapon by choice. Jake's legs nearly gave out. His mouth opened but no sound came. The dragon could speak. Not just understand but actually communicate. How long had Varthax been listening to conversations, understanding everything, while the Kratesh treated him like a mindless beast? You can talk, Jake finally managed to whisper. I have always possessed speech, Varthax replied, his mental voice carrying a weight that made Jake feel the centuries behind those words. The Kratesh know this. They simply do not care. To them, I am a weapon that happens to think. My thoughts do not matter, only my obedience. Jake glanced up at the edge of the pit high above. He could see the silhouettes of the guards and his friends, but they seemed so far away now, like they belonged to a different world. Down here in the pit, it was just him and this ancient creature who'd been treated as a monster for longer than Jake could imagine. How long? Jake asked. How long have they kept you here? I have waited 3 centuries for this moment, Varthax said, and Jake felt the sorrow in those words like a physical weight. 300 years. Jake couldn't even wrap his mind around that kind of time. These chains they used, these collars and cages, they think them unbreakable. But chains are only as strong as the will to resist them. I have played their game. I have starved myself, made them believe I was weakening, made them think I was broken. But you're not broken, Jake said, understanding flooding through him. No. I have simply been waiting. Waiting for one spark, one reminder of what freedom truly means. Waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to speak the truth they fear most, that I am not their creature. I never was. Jake's heart was racing now. You're planning to escape. You've been planning it this whole time. Yes. The dragon shifted slightly, and Jake saw something he hadn't noticed before. A thick metal collar around Varthax's neck, covered in Kratesh symbols and blinking lights. But there is a complication. This collar they have fitted me with is not merely for control. It contains explosives powerful enough to level this entire base. If I attempt to break it by force, if I fly too far from this pit, if I disobey certain commands, it detonates. Jake felt his hope crumbling. Then how? There is a way, Varthax interrupted. The collar can be overridden manually from the inside. The access panel is here against my neck where I cannot reach it. Someone must remain close, open the panel, and input the override sequence while I prepare to break free. The process takes time. And when the collar releases, the dragon paused. The explosion will be contained, directed inward toward whoever is closest to the mechanism. It took Jake a second to understand what the dragon was saying. Then it hit him like a punch to the gut. It's a suicide mission. Yes. Jake looked up again at the pit's edge. He could see Amy's face peering down, tears streaming. He could see Ryan, the kid who'd been blamed for their failure. He could see Beth, Tommy, and the others, all of them lined up to die because of Drex's cruelty and lies. They were good people. They deserved better than this. They deserved a chance. His decision came easier than he expected. I'll do it, Jake said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. Free my people. Save as many humans as you can. That's all I ask. Get them out of here, give them a fighting chance. That's worth it. Varthax's eyes seemed to glow brighter, those orange flames intensifying. You would die for them? For people you have known only months or years? You would trade your life without hesitation? In a heartbeat, Jake said, and he meant it. He'd watched too many good people die for nothing, in battles that meant nothing, for masters who saw them as less than nothing. If his death could mean something, could save his friends, could strike a blow against the Kratesh, then it was worth it. It was worth everything. The dragon was quiet for a long moment. Then something incredible happened. Varthax's lips pulled back, revealing rows of teeth each as long as Jake's arm. But it wasn't a snarl or a threat. It was something Jake never expected to see on a dragon's face. It was a smile. "You possess something rare, Jake Mitchell," Varthax said, and there was warmth in that ancient voice now. "Courage without foolishness. Sacrifice without martyrdom. You do not seek death, you simply refuse to let others die in your place. The Kratesh believe they have broken your species. They are wrong." Jake felt tears stinging his eyes but blinked them back. "So we have a deal?" "We have more than a deal," Varthax replied. "We have an accord. A pact between equals who have both worn chains too long. Today, Jake Mitchell, we both break free. I will save your people, every human I can reach. I will tear down these walls and scatter your captors like dust. And I will remember your name long after this day passes into legend." The dragon lowered his head even further, until his massive snout was almost touching Jake's chest. "Place your hand upon my scales. Let me show you what must be done." Jake reached out with shaking hands, his chains rattling, and placed both palms against the dragon's scales. They were warm, almost hot to the touch, and thrummed with barely contained power. Images flooded Jake's mind: the collar's mechanism, the override sequence, the timing that would need to be perfect. He saw it all, understood it all, even though the technology was far beyond anything humans had created. "Are you ready?" Varthax asked. Jake took a deep breath and looked up one last time at his friends at the pit's edge. He thought about Earth, about everything they'd lost, about everything they might still win back. "Yeah," Jake said. "Let's show them what happens when you cage something that was meant to fly." Everything happened in a blur after that moment of understanding between Jake and Varthax. Through their neural connection, the dragon flooded Jake's mind with information. Patterns of light and sound that represented the collar's override codes, sequences that needed to be entered in exact order, timing that had to be perfect down to the second. Jake's head spun trying to absorb it all, but somehow it stuck, like the knowledge had been burned directly into his brain. Varthax pulled back, giving Jake space to climb onto his neck where the collar sat. The metal was warm under Jake's hands, pulsing with energy that made his skin tingle. He found the access panel hidden beneath overlapping scales, exactly where Varthax had shown him. His fingers trembled as he pried it open, revealing a nightmare of alien technology. Wires and circuits that glowed with colors that didn't have names, symbols he couldn't read but somehow understood thanks to the dragon's teaching. "For freedom," Varthax's voice rumbled through Jake's mind one last time. Jake pressed his palm against the interface, feeling it recognize his touch. "For everyone who ever wore chains," he replied. Then Varthax moved. The dragon exploded upward from the pit like a volcano erupting. His wings snapped open with a sound like thunder, catching air and lifting them both toward the surface. Jake held on desperately, his chains tangling around the collar mechanism as wind screamed past his face. Above them, he could see the shocked faces of the Kratesh guards, see Drex's expression shift from amusement to horror. They burst from the pit into open air, and Varthax let loose a roar that shook the entire base. It wasn't just sound, it was fury given voice, 3 centuries of rage finally unleashed. The shockwave from that roar shattered windows, knocked guards off their feet, and sent alarms wailing across the compound. The Kratesh base descended into instant chaos. Guards were screaming orders in their harsh language, weapons firing in all directions. But Varthax was already moving, faster than something that size had any right to move. His tail smashed through a guard tower, sending it crashing down in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. His claws tore through walls like they were paper, ripping open the cell blocks where human prisoners were kept. Jake saw Warchief Drex running, trying to reach some kind of control panel, probably to detonate the collar manually. But Varthax was faster. One massive claw came down and Drex's running stopped permanently. The arrogant commander who'd sent so many humans to their deaths wouldn't be sending anyone anywhere ever again. But Jake couldn't watch. His fingers were flying across the collar's interface, inputting codes as fast as he could. Numbers and symbols flashed before his eyes. The mechanism was fighting him, security systems trying to reject his commands. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. His hands were shaking so badly he almost entered the wrong sequence twice. Then he saw it, a timer. The collar had activated its failsafe. 10 seconds until detonation. No, 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 Jake muttered, working faster. His fingers found the right patterns, pressing in the override codes Varthax had taught him. The timer kept counting down. 9 seconds. 8 seconds. Around him, the world was fire and chaos. Varthax was tearing through the compound, his roar mixing with explosions and the screams of Kratesh guards. Jake caught glimpses of human prisoners running free, his friends among them, chains broken and heading for the exits. 7 seconds. 6 seconds. One of the codes rejected. Jake cursed and entered it again, forcing his shaking hands to be steady. This time it took. A panel lit green. 5 seconds. 4 seconds. Almost there. Just 2 more sequences. His fingers moved on pure instinct now, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought was too slow. 3 seconds. The second sequence accepted. 1 more. Just 1 more. 2 seconds. Jake slammed his palm against the final override. For a horrible moment, nothing happened. The timer hit 1 second and Jake closed his eyes, thinking about Amy and Tommy and all his friends who'd make it out because of this. The collar clicked. All the lights died at once. The humming stopped. Jake slumped forward against the mechanism, barely able to believe it worked. His whole body was shaking, adrenaline and relief mixing into something that made him want to laugh and cry at the same time. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He expected the collar to explode inward like Varthax had warned. Expected pain and then nothing. But instead, he felt something else. A massive claw, gentle despite its size, carefully pulling him away from the collar. Varthax was holding him, protecting him as the collar fell away and crashed to the ground below. Nothing more than dead metal now. I am not them, Varthax's voice echoed in Jake's mind, warm and almost amused. I do not waste the brave. They descended to the ground where Jake's squad was waiting, freed from their chains. The moment Varthax set him down, Amy tackled Jake in a hug so fierce it knocked the air out of him. She was crying and laughing at the same time, hitting his shoulder and hugging him harder. Tommy was there too, and Beth and Ryan. The kid was grinning like he couldn't believe they were alive. Above them, Varthax spread his wings wide and roared again. This time it wasn't rage. It was victory. It was freedom. The sound echoed across Draker Prime, across the communication networks, across every slave compound where humans heard it and dared to hope. The message spread faster than wildfire. A human freed a dragon. Together they destroyed a Kratesh stronghold. The impossible had happened. It wasn't Earth's weapons that started the rebellion. It wasn't superior numbers or technology. It was one man refusing to accept that chains were permanent, and a dragon who remembered what it meant to choose his own path. The Kratesh had enslaved humanity thinking they'd conquered the species. They'd thought humans were weak, easily broken, useful only as tools. They were wrong. They'd just given humanity something far more dangerous than weapons. They'd given them a reason to fight, a symbol to rally behind, and proof that even the strongest chains could be broken. The galaxy was about to learn what humans did best. Refuse to stay down no matter how many times you knocked them there.